The sun rose over the sleepy town of Cedar Glen a few miles from Chicago, its warm light spilling onto Megan Montgomery's kitchen table. The room smelled of fresh-baked cinnamon rolls, a staple in Megan's house, where tradition and love were the main ingredients of every meal. At 68, Megan had silver-streaked hair neatly pinned into a bun, and her deep blue eyes radiated both wisdom and worry. She had raised her granddaughter Kim since the girl was 3 years old. When Kim's mother, Ellie, left for an overseas job, Megan stepped in. A fiercely protective yet gentle soul, Megan had become both mother and grandmother. She believed in letting Kim find her own path in life, despite Ellie's distant yet demanding expectations. Megan carried the weight of their fractured family dynamics, always trying to bridge the gap between her headstrong daughter and her fiercely independent granddaughter. Kim, now 21, was a vibrant young woman with an artistic flair that set her apart in Cedar Glen. Her long auburn hair often spilled over her sketch pad as she meticulously worked on her designs. Her hazel eyes held an intensity and determination that belied her years. Kim had been accepted into a prestigious design program and had already completed internships at top firms in Chicago. Interior design wasn't just a career choice for Kim, it was her passion. Megan couldn't be prouder. She had watched Kim grow into a self-assured young woman, one who was prepared to carve out her own life. But Megan knew that Ellie's imminent return from abroad would bring turbulence. Ellie Montgomery arrived in Cedar Glen on a brisk autumn morning, her arrival as unwelcome as the sharp chill that settled over the town. At 42, Ellie was polished and professional, with sleek black hair and a sharp sense of style that spoke to her years spent climbing corporate ladders abroad. But beneath her composed exterior lay a rigid, controlling nature that had driven a wedge between her and her daughter. Ellie hadn't been back in Cedar Glen for more than a day before she began asserting herself in Kim's life. "I just don't understand why you're wasting your talents on decorating," Ellie remarked during dinner. "You could be anything, Kim. A lawyer, a doctor, why settle for this?" Kim set down her fork, her temper flaring. "Interior design isn't just decorating, Mom. It's creating spaces where people feel at home. It's problem-solving, planning, and making something beautiful out of nothing." Megan, sensing the tension, intervened. "Ellie, Kim's worked so hard to get where she is. You should be proud of her." Ellie pursed her lips but said nothing. Later that evening, she announced her plan to stay in Cedar Glen indefinitely, much to Kim's dismay. Kim had never felt so suffocated in her own home. It had only been a few weeks since Ellie moved back to Cedar Glen, and already she had taken over every aspect of Kim's life. Her schedule, her meals, even her wardrobe. "You need to dress more elegantly, Kim," Ellie said one morning as she stood in the doorway of Kim's bedroom, arms crossed. "Men appreciate a woman who takes care of her appearance." Kim, still in her pajamas, barely looked up from her sketch pad. "I'm not trying to impress anyone." Ellie sighed dramatically. "That's exactly the problem. You don't even try." That afternoon, Ellie returned from a shopping trip, her arms filled with expensive dresses, blouses, and skirts. "Here," she said, dropping the bags on Kim's bed. "I picked these out for you. Something more feminine." Kim pulled out a floral dress with a fitted waist and frowned. "Mom, I don't wear things like this." "You do now," Ellie replied briskly. "I've arranged for you to meet someone special tonight at the Lakeside Grill. He's a wonderful young man. His family owns half the town." Kim's stomach dropped. "You set me up on a date? Without even asking me?" Ellie's face hardened. "Kim, you're 21. It's time to start thinking about your future. You don't want to end up alone, do you?" Kim clenched her jaw. "I'm not alone, Mom. I have my career. I have my own goals." Ellie waved a dismissive hand. "A career won't keep you warm at night, sweetheart." Megan, sitting in her armchair near the window, finally spoke up. "Ellie, let the girl breathe. She just started her life." Ellie ignored her mother's warning. "You'll thank me later," she said, leaving the room with an air of finality. That night, Kim arrived at the Lakeside Grill out of sheer obligation, wearing her usual jeans and a fitted sweater instead of the dress Ellie had bought. She spotted the man Ellie had set her up with immediately. He was tall, clean-cut, and smiling like he had already planned their wedding. "Hey, you must be Kim," he said, standing to shake her hand. "I'm Todd." Kim forced a polite smile, sitting down. "Nice to meet you." The evening was excruciating. Todd was perfectly nice. Too nice. He talked about how his family owned a chain of farm supply stores and how he was looking for a wife who valued tradition. Kim bit back the urge to scream. By the time dessert arrived, she had had enough. "Listen, Todd," she said bluntly. "You seem like a great guy, but this isn't me. I don't want a traditional life. I don't want to settle down right now." Todd blinked, stunned. "But your mom said," Kim groaned. "I don't care what my mom said." She stood up, threw some cash on the table, and walked out. When she got home, Ellie was waiting in the living room, arms crossed. "Why did Todd call me and say you walked out on him?" Ellie demanded. "Because I did," Kim snapped. "Mom, you can't control my life. Stop trying." Ellie scoffed. "I'm not controlling you, Kim. I'm guiding you. That's what mothers do." "No, Mom," Kim said, voice shaking. "Mothers support their daughters. They don't manipulate them into living lives they don't want." Ellie opened her mouth to argue, but Megan held up a hand. "That's enough, both of you." She turned to Ellie, her voice softer but firm. "Ellie, you weren't here for 18 years. You don't get to barge in now and act like you know what's best for her." Ellie's face flickered with emotion. Anger, hurt, maybe even guilt. But she quickly masked it. "I just want her to be happy," she muttered. Kim turned away. "Then let me live my life." For the first time, Ellie had nothing to say. Later that afternoon, Kim sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open, scrolling through listings for apartments. "What are you looking at?" Megan asked, setting down a cup of tea. Kim hesitated before answering. "I'm moving out, Grandma." Megan's brows lifted, but she didn't seem surprised. "I figured this day would come soon." Kim exhaled in relief. "You're not mad?" Megan shook her head. "Mad? No, but I worry about you. Living on your own is a big step." "I know," Kim said. "But I can't stay here anymore. Not with Mom controlling everything." Megan reached over and patted her hand. "I support you, sweetheart, but you know your mother won't take this well." Kim already knew, but she also knew she couldn't let that stop her. That evening, Ellie returned home to find Kim's suitcase open on her bed, clothes neatly folded inside. Ellie's heels clicked against the wooden floor as she strode in. "What the hell is this?" Kim didn't bother looking up. "I'm moving out." The room went dead silent. Ellie's face hardened. "No, you're not." Kim finally met her mother's gaze. "Yes, I am." Ellie let out a bitter laugh. "And where do you think you're going, Kim? You can't afford to live on your own. You're barely out of school. Who's going to take care of you?" "I can take care of myself," Kim said firmly. "I have savings from my internships, and I just got hired by a top company. I don't need your permission." Ellie crossed her arms, her jaw tight. "You're being ridiculous. This is a phase. You'll regret it." Kim inhaled sharply, trying to keep her voice even. "The only thing I regret is letting you make me feel like I'm not enough." "I am enough, Mom, and I don't need to live under your roof to prove it." Ellie's expression flickered. Anger, maybe even hurt. But she quickly masked it with indifference. "Fine," she snapped. "Go. But don't come running back when you realize how hard the real world is." Kim clenched her fists. "I won't." Megan, who had been standing quietly in the hallway, stepped forward. "Ellie, let her go. This is her choice." Ellie glared at her mother. "And you're just going to let her throw her life away?" Megan sighed. "She's not throwing anything away. She's starting something new." Ellie stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Kim's hands trembled as she zipped up her suitcase. The fight had drained her, but beneath the exhaustion, there was something else. A quiet sense of freedom. She was finally doing this. Kim sat at her desk in her small apartment, scrolling through her emails after another long day at the design firm. Most of the projects she had been assigned so far were minor, designing office spaces, assisting senior designers, and creating layout concepts for standard residential homes. But then one email stood out. Subject: a special restoration project. Her heart pounded as she clicked it open. "Dear Miss Montgomery, I came across your portfolio and was very impressed by your design aesthetic. I own the Ashford Manor, a 19th century historical estate here in Cedar Glen. I've been considering restoring it to its former grandeur and opening it to the public for historical tours and events. I'd like to meet with you to discuss this project. I'm looking for someone with vision, passion, and respect for history. I believe you could be the perfect fit. Looking forward to your response. Best, Eleanor Ashford." Kim's jaw nearly dropped. Eleanor Ashford was one of the most influential figures in Cedar Glen, and her family's estate was a landmark. This was more than just a project. This was an opportunity to establish herself as a designer in her own right. She immediately typed back a professional but eager response, setting up a meeting for the following week. This was it, her first big break. The following Monday, Kim arrived at Ashford Manor, an imposing Victorian-style mansion with intricate woodwork and a sprawling wraparound porch. The paint was faded, the once grand chandeliers dull with dust, and the wallpaper peeling from decades of neglect. But Kim could see the potential. Eleanor Ashford, a sophisticated woman in her 60s with striking silver hair, greeted Kim with a warm smile. "I've spoken with several designers," Eleanor said as they walked through the grand entryway, "but none of them seemed to understand the heart of this place." She turned to Kim. "Tell me, what do you see when you look at this house?" Kim took a deep breath, running her fingers along the ornate wooden staircase. "I see history. I see craftsmanship that you don't find anymore, and I see a home that has stories to tell." Eleanor's lips curved into a satisfied smile. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." Kim spent the next few weeks pouring herself into the design process, creating mood boards, selecting color palettes, and hunting down vintage pieces to restore the home's historical charm while incorporating modern touches. She worked tirelessly, balancing her job at the firm with late nights dedicated to the Ashford Manor project. She knew this had to be perfect. 6 months later, the Ashford Manor restoration was complete. The grand reopening was scheduled for a crisp autumn evening, and Cedar Glen's elite, history buffs, and curious townspeople all gathered for the big reveal. Kim stood in the main hall, adjusting the hem of her sleek but simple black dress. She could barely contain her excitement as guests walked through the doors, gasping at the transformation. The once dull chandeliers now sparkled, reflecting warm light onto the restored wooden floors. The walls, now adorned with elegant but historically accurate wallpaper, made the home feel as if it had been frozen in time, preserved yet vibrant with new life. She overheard whispers of admiration. "It's breathtaking. They've honored the home's history beautifully." Who was the designer? As Kim turned, her breath caught in her throat. Ellie was there. Her mother, dressed in her usual polished manner, stood near a group of women who were enthusiastically discussing the project. Kim hadn't invited her, but she should have known Ellie would come. At first, Ellie seemed indifferent, but then Kim saw it, the subtle change in her mother's posture, the way she tilted her head as she listened to the conversations around her. "The designer is incredibly talented," one woman gushed. "Oh yes, she's young but brilliant. Eleanor Ashford made an excellent choice. I'd hire her in a heartbeat for my own home." Ellie's expression softened, and for the first time in Kim's life, she saw something unexpected in her mother's eyes. Pride. As Kim moved to greet guests, she heard Ellie speaking quietly to one of the attendees. "She's my daughter." It was barely above a whisper, but Kim caught it. A lump formed in her throat, and she quickly turned away, pretending to adjust a vase of flowers so no one would see the tears forming in her eyes. Maybe, just maybe, her mother was finally seeing her for who she truly was. The grand reopening of Ashford Manor had been a success. Kim had barely been able to catch her breath between guests congratulating her and potential clients expressing interest in working with her. It was the kind of night she had dreamed of, proof that she was on the right path, that she could stand on her own without needing her mother's approval. But as the last of the guests filtered out and the staff began clearing the event space, Kim noticed Ellie lingering near the grand staircase. For a moment, Kim considered walking past her, pretending she hadn't seen her. But something in Ellie's posture made her pause. The rigid, always composed woman she had known her entire life looked hesitant, uncertain. Kim took a steadying breath and approached. "You didn't have to come," she said, keeping her tone neutral. Ellie turned, her expression unreadable. "I know." She was quiet for a moment before adding, "But I wanted to." Kim didn't know what to say, so she didn't say anything. She folded her arms, waiting for whatever her mother had to say next. Ellie exhaled softly and glanced around the beautifully restored mansion. "This place is stunning," she admitted. "Every detail, every touch, you brought it back to life." Kim's throat tightened. She wanted to brush it off, to act like it didn't matter that her mother was impressed, but deep down, it did. Ellie turned back to her, her perfectly composed face shifting into something raw, something vulnerable. "I owe you an apology, Kim." That caught Kim off guard. She blinked, stunned. "For what?" Ellie let out a shaky breath. "For not seeing you," she said quietly. "For not listening. For trying to push you into a life that wasn't yours. I thought I knew what was best for you, but the truth is, I never took the time to really learn who you were." Kim felt her heart hammering in her chest. "Mom," Ellie held up a hand. "Please, let me finish," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I spent years thinking I was doing the right thing, trying to mold you into the daughter I thought you should be. But tonight, standing here, hearing all those people talk about your work, seeing the pride in their eyes when they spoke your name, I realized I was wrong." Kim swallowed hard. Ellie stepped closer, her gaze earnest. "You are remarkable, Kim. Not because you followed my plan, but because you followed your own. And I was too blinded by my own expectations to see that sooner." Kim's vision blurred with unshed tears. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," Ellie continued softly. "But I want you to know that I'm done trying to force you into my world. You have your own now, and it's beautiful. And if you'll let me, I'd love to be a part of it. Not as the mother who tries to control you, but as the mother who supports you." For the first time in her life, Kim saw her mother not as the overbearing woman she had fought against, but as a flawed, complicated person who had made mistakes she was finally owning. Kim wiped at her eyes and let out a shaky laugh. "Took you long enough?" Ellie let out a small chuckle, her own eyes glistening. "Yeah, it did." There was still a long way to go, and Kim knew they wouldn't magically fix everything overnight. But as she stood there in the grand foyer of Ashford Manor, in the space she had transformed with her own hands, she realized something. For the first time in her life, she and her mother were finally speaking the same language. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start again. The days following the Ashford Manor reopening felt like a whirlwind for Kim. The success of the project brought in more inquiries than she had ever expected. Local business owners, homeowners, and even a few out-of-town clients reached out, eager to work with the young designer who had breathed life back into one of Cedar Glen's most cherished landmarks. For the first time, she felt truly seen, not as Ellie Montgomery's daughter, not as a girl struggling to prove herself, but as Kim Montgomery, a talented designer with a future that was entirely her own. One afternoon, as she sat in her small office space, reviewing sketches for a new project, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "You're a hard woman to track down these days." Kim looked up to see Ellie standing in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I figured you could use a break," Ellie said, setting one cup on the desk. "Black with a splash of vanilla, just how you like it." Kim arched a brow. "Since when do you remember how I take my coffee?" Ellie gave a small, self-conscious smile. "I'm trying." Kim studied her mother carefully, sensing the sincerity in her words. After their conversation at Ashford Manor, things hadn't changed overnight. There were still moments of tension, times when Ellie's instincts to control resurfaced, and times when Kim had to remind her that she was an adult capable of making her own choices. But Ellie had made an effort, real effort, to understand her. She stopped pushing blind dates. She stopped dismissing Kim's career. Instead, she started asking about it. "So," Ellie continued, settling into the chair across from Kim's desk, "tell me about your new project." Kim hesitated for only a second before flipping her sketch pad around so Ellie could see the layout she was working on. "It's for a couple restoring an old inn near the lake," she explained. "They want to keep the charm but make it feel fresh and inviting. I'm thinking soft neutrals, antique fixtures, a blend of modern and vintage." Ellie nodded, genuinely intrigued. "It sounds incredible. You really have an eye for this." Kim felt warmth spread through her chest. A year ago, she never would have imagined hearing those words from her mother. "Thanks, Mom." Ellie smiled. "I mean it, Kim. And I know I said this before, but I'm really proud of you." For the first time, Kim didn't feel the need to fight for her mother's approval. She already had it. And, more importantly, she had her own. A year later, Kim stood in her own design studio, a a small but thriving space filled with mood boards, fabric swatches, and renderings of her upcoming projects. She had built something real, something hers. Megan visited often, always bringing fresh-baked cookies and stories about the town gossip. Ellie, too, was becoming a more frequent visitor, though now their conversations were filled with curiosity and mutual respect rather than conflict. They weren't perfect, their relationship still had rough edges, but it was healing. One evening, as Kim locked up her studio, she turned back and took a deep breath. She had left home to find herself, and now she finally felt at home, right here, in the life she had chosen. Hope you enjoyed this story of redemption and forgiveness by Green Tea Tales. Help our channel grow by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Thank you.